I could sit here all
No.
day and tell you the crazy stories that I've heard about the way in which wealth has been, like, product and wealth have been literally depossessed from people in the most flagrant way you can think of. Like, truck came, took their shit, didn't pay them. Like, it's like you bought that coffee and
Mm.
sold it. Like, I think there's such a way in which, you know, tying this all to quality. What happens if that is how your 88, 89, 90 point coffee was sourced? And how do you know that it wasn't done that way? Because you bought it from somebody who gave you an FOB price of $9, $10 a pound and they speak English and they're from Colombia. But did it come from their 5 hectare farm? Or did it come from somebody else? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much in
Mm.
here that like is needs to be unpacked, and the realities that we need to sit with, and I've said this a lot, is that quality isn't saving us from all these problems. Quality is
At
giving us
all.
a get out of jail free card. It's saying, hey, you got the quality, you got the FOB, we're good here. No one needs to know more than that. And on the backside of that, what are you doing? You're perpetuating a conventional coffee dynamic that does the same things that you say you don't want to do and that you tell your consumers you don't do, but it's happening under your nose.
If the content we bring you on the podcast has helped you with your business or your career and you're looking for a way to financially support the independent production of this podcast, you can do that for as little as a few dollars a month by backing us on Patreon or becoming a paid subscriber on our YouTube channel. Another way to support us and continue your learning is to purchase one of our on-demand workshops available on our website, mapperforward.coffee/workshops. Check the show notes for links, and as always, thanks for the support. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of a 5-part series with Brendan Adams from Semilla Coffee. Brendan is based in Canada. Where are your offices, Brendan? Where are Semilla's offices around the world?
Yeah, I mean, our team is largely remote all over the place. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think you could broadly say that on paper, our office lives in Montreal in Canada. So we've been there since the beginning of the Semilla. And then also in Germany, we have an office in Bremen in Germany as well, in northern Germany. We also
Right.
operate an export arm in Honduras as well called Sueños de Semilla, which is like a partner organization.
And where do you guys export from, and where are your markets into?
Yeah, so we're primarily shipping like direct from origin to United States, Canada, and Europe. Those are the main place where we're landing full containers. We do
Mm-hmm.
ship now to Japan. We're opening an office in Japan at the end of this year with our partner Keisuke there. He's been receiving smaller amounts, obviously, so we do those as consolidated shipments that we send from Canada or Europe on to Japan. So yeah, those are primarily what we're serving.
Okay, excellent. So, in this series, folks, we're talking about, can we actually make coffee better? You can deconstruct where the make coffee better comes from. But in this episode, we're talking about how should we be discussing quality in specialty coffee. I have been asking pretty much everybody that comes on the podcast this last couple of months how they talk about quality, and how do you define quality in coffee?
Mm. Yeah, I think quality, this has always been like a real stickler for me. I remember from the very
Yeah.
beginning of like my roasting journey, um, just as sort of like an anecdotal experience of this was uh, roasting a coffee one time we did our first couple roasts of it, and everybody in the team right away was just willing to say, no, like this isn't the coffee. And it was an Ecuadorian coffee. And so I didn't see a lot of Ecuadorian coffees at that point. It was very strange to see those
Hmm.
12, 15 years ago in specialty context. And Ecuador is very special to me. And so I'd been there. It was one of the first places I ever went in Latin America. I spent a lot of time there. I really felt this personal connection to it. And I realized that I got obsessed with this notion that like this needs to be good. Like I need to find a way to show people that this coffee is good. And I just worked on it. And I remember this still to this day is one of those most fulfilling coffee quality stories for me, is that like I can still
Mm.
remember the filter coffee cups I would get out of that good roast that I did out of that when I finally figured out the profile and managed what to do with it. And I think that really was like an eye-opening moment for me where I was like, I actually don't care about objective quality. I actually care about what came behind this and how it emotionally connects to me. And so I think that from that moment, I was always consistently thinking about how coffee intersects so much, like we just view it as this commodity. But once you start to connect in the global south and connecting with producing communities, and you just realize like what goes through a single seed of coffee, the intersection of like geography, history, politics, philosophy, revolutionary struggle. Like it's just crazy the
Economics,
stuff
all
that
of
it
it.
carries, everything that it carries right to our hands. And then we sit there and go, does it taste good enough though? It's so
Right.
shallow and it's so empty and hollow. And so even to this day, like I love great coffee, for sure. And you're never going to get me saying like, oh, when you brew me a really beautiful cup of whatever geisha or something from, like I will say this is great. But the things that matter the most to me in coffee are like the things that can somehow transport not only a solid cup of coffee, I don't want to drink garbage, obviously, but that comes from somebody
Mm,
that I know and care about, and I know their struggle and I know their experience. And I think that's been like a huge fundamental motivation for me is like, how do we get away from this like fundamentally like capitalist expediency of like cup it, it tastes good, what's the price, buy it, okay, now I can sell this and I can make money and we can rinse and repeat. I get it. There's more work on having to explain to your customer why this coffee matters. But I guarantee you that across the supply chain, everybody will feel a lot better about it from the one drinking it all the way to the one who produced it and the one who picked it. If there's this commitment to saying, like, let's make sure that quality doesn't just end on it's an 86, it's clean. With that, right? It's an 86 is like, let's talk about that later. Let's talk about the people that that founded it and all the things that came through them, right? So I think that quality for me is of course like a tricky subject because so many people who run roasteries, I get it. You're competing with lots of competitors and you love great coffee. You at the end of the day want to quote unquote or need to quote unquote win this game. But I think that we need to expand how we define winning in that scenario and how we define our ability to do the work, right? And I think that a lot of us fall into a trap of like, if I don't get the best stuff, my business won't survive. But it's like, well, then how do you define best, and how do you relay that best to the people who buy it, so they therefore support that? And I think that's sort of one of the things with quality that has been the laziness of it, is that it is fundamentally
mm,
just like it's the same thing as saying like, oh, I'll buy the most expensive thing because it has to be the best. No, it doesn't. Like the most
mm.
expensive things in the world aren't necessarily the best things. And I think that's the same trap we fall into, that, oh, because it's scored this high and it's from this place and it's this variety, it must be the best. I guess so. But there's a lot of people out there that when you serve them like the best Kenyan coffee you've ever had in your life, they say this is disgusting. It tastes like tomato juice. I want the Sumatra. Like
Right.
there's
Word.
we're getting sucked into like a scenario where like we believe all of these sort of like objective, this is what sells, this is what works. And A, it may not actually do what we think it does. And
No.
B, what if we tried this other thing and worked on that? What would it do? And especially when you look at the fact that, from my perspective, the last point I'd say about it is that quality to the consumer fundamentally does, at least in the markets I deal with a lot of time, it has a lot to do with everything beyond that cup. And in fact, many of them
Mm,
feel like when you say this number, they're just like, okay, like, I don't care. Like, what does this do for me? But when you tell them, hey, this
right.
came from like, boy, we just ran on our Instagram yesterday, Victoria Aguirre, one of the most impressive women I've ever met in my life. Not about a coffee producer in general,
Wow.
but just like a person who's just an organizer, who's built their entire community, who's developed community banks in order to support their community from not selling to intermediaries, who's like pulled her entire community up from like subsistence living off of like corn and beans with literally no economic access to anything, just out of pure like, I'm going to do this. Like that person's story needs to come before the fact that their coffee is a clean 86.5 point per bone. You know what I mean? And there has to be some way that we can make people understand that. And I think that we can. I think Simi is a testament to that. That like if you are willing to listen and think about these other considerations and contexts, you won't lose. You won't lose in that game.
Mm. So many things I want to ask you after that. The place I'm going to start is, what role do you think that marketing, actually, let me say that better. What do you think the relationship is between marketing and what people think quality is?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? I guess it depends on a lot of different markets. Like I think of Japan, who like
Mm,
so many people in Japan, these brands will spend tons of money on the highest quality auction coffee or on a Blue Mountain coffee, and they'll use it as a marketing budget. Like they know they'll never make money on that. They just are like, if
Mm.
I put it out there on the sign and everybody knows I have the best thing, then theoretically down the road it's going to bring more prestige and attention to my brand and to my company. I think in North America, I think it's quite different. I think that marketing fundamentally, a lot of people in marketing don't necessarily, they don't really know how to. I want to say that I want to indict marketing people. That's not what I want to frame it. I would say that in our attempt to market coffee, let's put it that way, we're thinking about it too much as a product, I would say. And I think that obviously it is, but that's sort of like the knee-jerk obvious reaction, right? Like, oh, okay, this is this variety and it's like this quality and it's this tasting note. But
Mm.
like, and then what? And then what? I think a lot about this scenario of like the fact that like, when we get into this scenario where we're just fighting basically in a saturated market for like quality and service, what does your consumer actually care about you? What does the person who buys from you really care when at the end of the day you're just like another person that says the same thing, another brand that says I buy high grade specialty coffee quality, from these places and we roast it to perfection and like we care about each cup, and at the end of the day it becomes so derivative that like you're really just fighting for space and there's very little actual like loyalty or concern for your mission or your
Mm.
cause, which is worrying for me, not because of a brand existence standpoint. It's worrying for me on a producer existence standpoint, because if we're just
Right.
getting into this sinkhole of like, oh, this person also does high quality direct trade coffee with a producer name and it's great and it's roasted lightly to perfection, like what is our value add? At the end of the day, what makes any of us matter? And then this is where the marketing becomes really scary, because this is where that consolidation of power and wealth comes in. Because if all of our game is that we're going to pay more money for high quality, guess who's going to win that game? Actually,
Yeah. The
it's
people
going to
with the
be
deeper
a mess of
pockets.
boys who have the big
Uh-huh.
pockets. I can't remember which. I think it was either Lavazza or Illy. Like they've started like toying with the idea of having like a small micro roasting brand. And for them, a small micro
Yeah.
roaster brand is going to be like
They all have
multiple
them.
70 kilo. Yeah. And they're going to buy like the fanciest, like Yemen auction coffees and whatever. Like they're going to have the stuff that's $200 a pound, because for them, that's just like whatever, go for it. It's just a dalliance. And so it's a good example, right, of the sense that like if we're going to exist as small companies, small independent brands that are driven by passion and driven by vision, you got to lead with that passion and vision. And if that passion and vision is just, it's high quality, it's great, and we're marketing it because it tastes good, there's somebody out there that's going to school you who runs a whole marketing department that's going to be able to do that way better than you. And so I think that there's like a real
Yeah.
question there about like how marketing, the runway of marketing in the small, passion driven sort of like smaller business cycle, SMEs, and then also like
Hmm.
how quickly that quality proposition just becomes saturated in the same way that, you know, the electronics industry or any sort of the airline industry, any of these things get sort of consumed by the fact that like once there's a good value proposition, more and more actors come in. And if we're only competing over quality and service and over a product and not over like a why or a vision of why we're doing it, that's going to be either
Very
like kind of
much.
luck of the draw at the
Well,
very best, or also who's got the most resources to stay standing longer.
there's no way that these two extremes can compete. Like we don't
Mhm.
any SMEs that are or small businesses, okay? Any small businesses that think that they are going to school the big boys on any of this, you're dreaming. We're
Mhm.
not even having the same conversations,
No.
folks. What they look
Mhm.
at for quality and what we as artisans, quote unquote, in specialty coffee look at, they're not even in the same dimension.
Yeah.
They're looking at connecting the very extensive market research that they have done and making sure that they're pushing product out the door at a time where there is so much politics connected to FMCG, fast moving consuming goods, so much politics. When you look at things like Maha, what Kennedy Jr. is doing with regards to removing food dyes and additives to a lot of products, these big businesses are being stretched really, really thin with regards to how they're making decisions and how much profits they're making. They've got to deliver for their shareholders, otherwise their share price goes down. The things that are driving their decision making around quality and the things that are driving our decision making around quality as small businesses, not even the same dimension.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
people need to understand that because, let's take Luckin that's gone
Mhm.
into the United States this week or last week. That's a very interesting case study. For those
Mhm.
who don't know, Luckin is a Chinese company. Its first iteration had to be saved by the government in China. And it was being run by a tech guy who had some interesting ways of doing accounting. The people who took it over, the investors and the government that took it over, they have just done these incredible things with this business where now in just a few years they have turned it into 22,000 stores across China. They're opening 1,000 stores
Mhm.
every year.
Yeah. Mhm.
You cannot fucking compete with a company that is opening
No.
hundreds of stores a day.
Yeah.
It's just not fucking possible. And so
No. Yeah.
when you think in your little business, and bless you for trying to compete with a business, Brandon, I cannot tell you the number of people that come to me and say, I want to be the next Starbucks. Starbucks
Yeah.
can't be the next fucking Starbucks. Starbucks
Mhm.
now has to contend with Luckin, which is the new Starbucks.
Yeah. Mhm.
And watch them do that in the United States, right?
Yeah. For sure. No, I mean, I think it drives home the point exactly. Like, I think scale is crazy, right? Like, we're an importer and we're a small importer, but there are brands like that that are massive compared to us. Like, I always say
Yeah.
we're like a drop in the bucket in terms of the scale. Like, not even a drop, a half a drop, like a
Yeah.
mist in the bucket, in terms of like when you see the scale that I think a lot of us forget when we're getting really into this super niche specialty coffee market, which like is fine. You're running, it's no disrespect to people running small businesses. It's hard and you build a lot of, it takes a lot of work and you generate a ton of employment. Some countries like Canada, like small businesses are the leading employers in our country, and I think
Yeah.
it's the same in many parts of the world. So like these things are super important. But I think what I always underline to like our clients or to like people that I talk to in general is that it's like if you're going to do this, then taking all of this stuff that you just shared that's super valuable context, do it with passion and with a love to do something real. Don't get into this game to try to win on quality or be the big boy or whatever because like it's just a I don't I just why it's just like a it's a there's always a bigger fish. There's always someone better than you. There's always someone bigger than you. The biggest thing is like find something to your point earlier in the first episode, right? It's so intricate and it's so confusing and it's so hard to know exactly what's going on the specialty side or on the supply side, sorry. And so like when we do is like I don't tell you what's going on in Guatemala. I don't know. You want to know about what's happening in Mataquescuintla, Jalapa? I'll tell you a 15-year story from everything that I know about it, with all the people who have sourced the information to me, all of the references I have, journalistic, local, government, whatever. That I have that memorized. Tell you the whole thing. But that's my focus and that's my commitment to make sure that that little part of the world that I can tell you front, back, and center exactly how that works. And I think it's the same thing, right? Like when you're working on something,
Mm.
just you have to find some way in this industry and what you're doing to really commit to it in a way that is super intentional, super focused, and trying to understand a vision and a mission beyond it. And if we're just getting into this scenario of running coffee businesses because we just want to buy and sell fancy coffee, like
We can't even
I just think it's
guarantee that there's a future of that.
exactly.
You,
And even looking at just right now, like, from your point about tariffs, like there's just not even right now, just in the United States, you can't get the coffee you used to get spot, right? Like I used to refer to this at the beginning
no.
of Semilla as the infrastructure of privilege, the way in which our industry
Mm,
has
I
just
like that.
evolved to the point where you can call 8 importers and get 36 samples of all these different crazy coffees that you never would have got in a million years 20 years ago. But then you can get it super easily now, and then you can cup it and you can say, look, I selected the best coffee and I do this relationship thing and I got the copy from the importer and I put it on my website and you can do that whole like operation. But look how easily that house of cards fell down. One dude came in
Yeah.
6 months, said, here's a couple tariffs. And now people who didn't pre-book their coffee or understand how to do that are like,
I fucked.
I can't get anything now. And I'm just running my business on whatever I can get. And, I'm getting, for the first time ever, I'm getting phone calls from American roasters being willing to take coffee from a Canadian warehouse. Like, not to say that people haven't done it before, but that was like you'd
Wow.
never do it for most of them because there's so much coffee that why would you go all the way into Canada and pull that stuff
Yeah.
down and deal with the border and all that kind of stuff? But now it's just like, oh, there's no coffee, so like you're gonna have to go to
Doesn't
some.
the
Like I think that's something to put into a really clear frame for people.
doesn't the so that's for because of supply reasons, or is that because of the tariff reasons?
I think it's both, right? Like I think you're dealing with the high market price led to a lower inventory. Big traders who would have stocked a
For
lot of stuff for
sure.
you before,
There's
the
no
stuff that would
spot.
have had in your blenders or some of
Right.
your like, traceable micro lots that were questionable but existed. Like the price was so high that these people didn't want to buy those coffees,
Yeah.
right? And they didn't want to speculate them and bring them in there and thought that you weren't going to buy them. That was pre-tariff. That was like January, February, they're buying these coffees. December, they didn't want to bring it in. And so you already had importers not wanting to bring in a bunch of inventory, thinking that they're going to sit on it and not make their money back. And then
Mm,
the tariffs hit in, it just became even like a double whammy, right? And so, yeah, there's just a much less spot coffee available, which, like,
totally.
of course, I expected it would take until July or August for that to become a reality. But many people weren't prepared for that. And so I guess the point is just saying that, like, on so many premises, the notion of just like quality over everything will win the game. It's such a tenuous premise on so many levels. And it's just like we have to commit to something more deep, something more real, and something fundamentally that centers the people who grow the coffee yesterday. Because it's just like if you're just doing this because you can try to find the best cup of coffee, it's just not it's just not a solid business plan on just a pure numbers basis,
No,
but then also in terms of
it's not
like
going to
trying
work.
to maintain long term, it's also just not going to work for you because it's not a consumer desire. It's not enough big of a market for it. There's too much competition. It's got to be deeper than that. So all of the things early in this about what quality means to me, I don't even view that as like a dalliance anymore. Like, oh, I have many experiences with people in specialty coffee where I tried to sell them coffee leading with the story. And a lot of them have said, oh, well, like, it was a really nice story you told me, but the coffee wasn't good enough, you know? And sort of like the implication being that, like, I'm using the
You're
story, real
manipulating.
stories of people, I'm manipulating them in order to get them to buy something. And I'm like, you can view it that way. You can view it as like I'm some sort of snake oil salesman that somehow sells you the real lived experience of people that like to sell the coffee, you could view it that way. Or you could recognize it and say that like this is the frontier that we need to get to with coffee because like otherwise it's just a zero sum game that we're all just piling into the same sinking ship for. Um, so I think
Yeah,
that
and again,
that's sort of like turning to a certain extent.
there's a perceived assumption that we have the entitlement to be able to think that we don't have to give a fuck about the supply chain because it's going to be here forever. That is a
Oh, for
very
sure.
dangerous assumption, folks. You're assuming that the coffee farmers who have subsidized this industry for far too many decades are going to continue doing that because in my opinion, we have not followed through on the promise of specialty coffee.
No, I
If we
totally
go
agree
back
with
to
you.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with you. I can give you a really beautiful anecdote for this actually that just happened to me this year is that we've started
Hmm.
working in Mexico now after many years of being interested in and we're working with a couple groups, one in Oaxaca and San Agustin Los Icha, indigenous Zapotec group, and then also a couple groups in Veracruz. And in my traveling in Veracruz, I had the privilege of meeting a really interesting cooperative that's been around since the 80s, I believe, and like have lived through all of it. Went through the collapse of Inma Cafe, the end of the International Coffee Agreement, the Roya crises, and really just like organized themselves around the notion of like we're going to figure this out regardless. And so everything that they're doing in terms of the way that they're organizing it works great for them. But from a
Hmm.
specialty perspective or like an external market perspective, it's not good enough. Why? Because they run a general wet mill where they bring in coffee from 60 to 70 different producers. They process the geisha with the Tipica, with the Costa Rica. They do
Right.
altitudes from 1,300 to 1,800 meters. They're not doing lot separations. They're patio drying. They're not raised bed drying. They're doing all of this stuff that, like, fundamentally, like a specialty buyer would be like, ooh, I don't know, like, not that good. Those people tried super hard to get into the fair trade market. They tried super hard to get into a specialty market. They had buyers in both markets. In both cases, either the fair trade buyers didn't like pay them the very minimal fair trade premium they would get, and at the same time, from their own words, they got a whole bunch of top-down advice, aka orders, on how they should not bring their children to the farm and how they should not leave garbage in their farm and all this different stuff that like fundamentally limited their access, that they were just like, I get what you're going for, but at the end of the day, like, let us do our thing. Like, we're the ones that will
Yeah.
manage this and we will take care of it, and we will make sure that we take care of our land the way that we need to, But then primarily the other option was they got into specialty and shorted on payment, didn't get their money on time, didn't get paid at all. And so I was sitting there talking to them and I was like, so what's the horizon? And they were just like, we don't do that anymore. Our members now run their own roasters. We sell our coffee domestically in Mexico. And I literally, if I wanted to sell you coffee right now, I couldn't, because it's all being sold at a differential price within our country. And I just sat there and I honestly, even now, it gives me tears in my eyes, because like that
You
is a
can't be
producer
upset
agency
about that,
story
right?
where it's
Yeah.
just like, good for you, man. Like, good for you
That's
to
a
find the
success
way that
story.
you don't have to rely on any
Yeah.
dummy external person, some white person
Yeah.
who comes in there and tells you all the things you need to do in order to be successful, how they're going to set the terms, how they're going to make it work for you. No, you tried to do it that way. You realized it didn't work, and you just found another solution. And I think
I love
fundamentally,
it.
like in Semilla, we always talk about autonomy and agency, and that has to be the goal of everything we do. Is that smallholders have the autonomy and the agency to do whatever they want, because at the end of the day, it will never be fixed if it comes down to Semilla is just another benevolent enterprise that tells you, here's the
Mm.
better price for you, and we're here to support you, and we're great. That can't be the end goal. It's just the same thing as the quality discussion. We do this, we end up in the same place. But I think fundamentally, the biggest thing from that anecdote to me is what you just said. They were totally let down by the system that tells everybody it's perfect,
Yep.
And I
Yeah.
think that that's like
A
a really big thing to
100%.
sit with. It's a really big thing for us to sit with, that in many contexts, specialty and fair trade have failed people, failed them. Not like, oh, it didn't work that great, like stole from them, took their
A,
money,
a
didn't pay them.
thousand
Yeah.
percent.
And so it's like, this isn't, and that's not an isolated anecdote. I could sit here all
No.
day and tell you the crazy stories that I've heard about the way in which wealth has been, like, product and wealth have been literally depossessed from people in the most flagrant way you can think of. Like, truck came, took their shit, didn't pay them. Like, it's like, you bought that
Oh
coffee
yeah.
and sold it. Like, I think there's such a way in which, you know, kindness all to quality. What happens if that is how your 88, 89, 90 point coffee was sourced? And how do you know that it wasn't done that way? Because you bought it from somebody who gave you an FOB price of $9, $10 a pound, and they speak English and they're from Colombia. But did it come from their 5 hectare farm, or did it come from somebody else? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much in
Mm.
here that like is needs to be unpacked, and the realities that we need to sit with. And I've said this a lot, is that quality isn't saving us from all these problems. Quality is
At
giving us
all.
a get out of jail free card. It's saying, hey, you got the quality, you got the FOB, we're good here. No one needs to know more than that. And on the backside of that, what are you doing? You're perpetuating a conventional coffee dynamic that does the same things that you say you don't want to do, and that you tell your consumers you don't do, but it's happening under your nose. And
Yeah.
that's something that we all have to really sit with.
Well, and that brings us to what we want to talk about in the next episode, which is what questions should we be asking about the supply chain? That's a really great lead into that. So join us for the next episode, folks. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.